Welcome to Thrive Deeper, an ongoing conversation with Dr. Matthew Jacoby, author of the Thrive Bible Reading Guides, teaching pastor, and leader of the Psalmist band Sons of Korah. Join us as we go deeper into the Bible, discussing the passages as we read them together with Thrive. Now here's your host, DJ Payne.
G'day and welcome to episode 47 of Thrive Deeper. Yes, it's I, your humble host, DJ Payne here, and we are almost through the book of Proverbs. Is it just me, or does it feel like we've been in the book of Proverbs for about 3 years now? I'm loving every minute of it, but I've got to be honest, I'm very much looking forward to getting out of the book of Proverbs into the next edition. We're almost there. And on this week's conversation, you'll hear Matt and I go deeper into this conversation about discipline, especially when it comes to self-discipline, self-control, and what does that mean in light of the fruits of the Spirit? So join us now after the break, conversation between Matthew Jacoby and myself here on Thrive Deeper.
I went rollerblading today.
Besides rollerblading, you just got back from Tasmania. You just got back from a tour of Tasmania.
The exciting thing about this weekend was that I went rollerblading, man. Like, that's like a big thing for me.
Now, last week...
With my daughter.
Yeah, last week people got a glimpse, if they listened all the way through to the episode.
Excuse me. What are you putting that on the end for?
I put that on the end of a glimpse of your conversation with your darling daughter, Ivy, who's just had a birthday.
She's just had a birthday. She's turned 11.
11, and you took her rollerblading. Did you get on the roller disco floor as well?
Yeah, you know when in the 80s, I'm a child of the 80s, so of course I can rollerblade. You know, there was always that cool kid that just carved it up. My head, that was me today.
But in reality?
Yeah, I don't know. That's not important.
So did you roller skate or rollerblade?
No, I bladed, yeah. I actually have rollerblades.
So you're allowed to take your own rollerblades along to the roller skating rink? They're that desperate for people to come along?
Well, it was, Ivy and her cousin, and was coaching them most of the time. Yeah. But they picked it up.
Okay.
No broken bones.
Good. Yeah. Excellent. That's what you've been doing just before you've rocked into here.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're fully prepared.
I'm a bit dizzy.
Fully prepared. Now, we are wrapping up in the next couple of episodes, today and next week, the book of Proverbs. It feels like we've been in here forever.
Yeah. Well, it's been good because there's such a variety of topics that we've been able to talk about.
Yeah.
And it's been great.
We've had sort of like, it almost feels to me like the last couple of months has almost been like an offshoot of the regular podcast.
Yeah.
It's been a different podcast.
Because normally we're immersed in the books and what's happening and what that means and this means. And it's been a different couple of months. It's been great.
Definitely. So last week, the topic that we covered for a very different episode last week, it was a very personal episode in two parts. First of it talking about, discipline in life, very generally. And then the second part talking about the discipline of our children as parents.
Yeah.
You wanted to stay in the topic of discipline this week.
Yeah, well, I thought it would be interesting to talk about spiritual disciplines and the importance of spiritual disciplines in our lives. I think that discipline. I mean, we've talked a little bit about self-discipline and the importance of being self-disciplined. Mm-hmm. But I think there's something to say about the spiritual disciplines because there's a real importance to this topic in the sense that I know that we would like everything to come really naturally and just for life to flow, but actually walking with God involves a high degree of intentionality. Mm-hmm. And it just does, as much as we would just love to work on pure inspiration all the time, pure inspiration doesn't always happen. And actually, one of the discipline by definition is doing good things because they're good things, not
Yes.
whether we feel like it or not. And there's a place for that in the spiritual life. And so I have discovered down through the years the importance of discipline. As I said, I think I said in the last episode, I'm naturally I can be quite disciplined in areas of my life, and I have applied that in the spiritual life. I've applied that to reading the Bible and having times for prayer, and it actually has, in the past, it has become a bit of a self-congratulatory sort of achievement-oriented sort of thing. Like discipline can be really a form of control orientation in a way, or achievement orientation. Like, look how regular I am, and it can become a bit of a religious thing in the negative sense.
Yes.
Now, people talk about doing things religiously, and that's a way of saying, someone does something very regularly. But actually, there's a positive sense to that too. I mean, on the other side of real relationship and our lives being really surrendered to God, I mean, we still need to practice spiritual disciplines, and we need to be disciplined about making space in our lives for prayer and reading Scripture, and for long-term benefit, not just for short-term inspiration. And I think I have, I have said previously, with reading the Bible, for example, that we don't just do that for short-term inspiration; it's for long-term, benefit. So being disciplined in our study of Scripture, I think, is an important thing. I think putting time aside to pray and to spend time with God is really important, as long as we understand that it's not like our visit to God in a portion of the day. Like, we just go and visit God and then we just go off on our own for the rest of the day. I mean, God wants us to walk with Him all the time, but it's like the principle of quality time, really. It's that concentrated time for us to focus our minds.
Okay, before we drill down any deeper into this concept of self-discipline, is another way to, am I right to think that another phrase for self-discipline is self-control?
Yeah, it's...
or am I on the wrong track?
No, it is. Self-control is part of... It's the same thing.
Okay. So
I guess I'm thinking of self-discipline as... Like, self-control applies to me curbing certain passions and impulses.
Okay.
So self-control is like impulse control, whereas self-discipline is more positive. It's not me stopping myself from doing things, which is what I associate with self-control. By self-discipline, I mean actually disciplining myself to do good things.
Okay, so when I read about the fruit of the Spirit, okay, I think immediately my mind goes to the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, Galatians 5.
Self-control,
and the last one is usually listed self-control, depending what translation you're reading. I've seen it translated into self-discipline as well. I've seen it translated into a few different words. So does everything we're talking about, does this come underneath the umbrella of the fruits of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit actively bearing fruit in our life, or are you talking about something different?
That's good. That's a good question. Well, I think it is. I think it is a fruit of the Spirit because it's an expression of our commitment. So discipline, us disciplining, bringing spiritual disciplines into our lives is absolutely an expression of our commitment. So it's, we would say if you belong to a football team, your commitment to that football team will be expressed in the fact that you turn up regularly to practice, that you don't just do the least, that you do over and above that. So our those spiritual disciplines are an expression of commitment. So in that sense, yes, absolutely.
I think
fruit of the Spirit.
Okay, so the next thought that I have in my head after we talk about self-control, self-discipline, the fruit of the Spirit is, I then think of the Apostle Paul, the life of the Apostle Paul. Basically, one of our greatest mentors, pictures of the faith, because a lot of the themes that he talks about, even if he doesn't use the expression self-control, is about self-control. He talks about buffeting his body. He talks about being in control. He talks about, going past and beyond what his natural man can do, hitting into this supernatural and talking about putting off the old, on the new. And he talks about it in a spiritual way, but as Paul often does, he often talks about it in a real nitty-gritty,
he does,
rubber hitting the road way of going, I could only do this, but I kept on going because I'm in control, self-discipline. Off I go.
Yeah. Well, here's the interesting thing about Paul and his approach to that is that he steps out of the old by stepping into the new.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing, because I think what we can focus on is just stopping the bad stuff.
Yes.
And you actually can't stop the bad stuff until you actually step into the new stuff. And this is where a lot of people get stuck, I think, because we think, I've got to stop the bad stuff in order to step into the new stuff.
But sometimes it comes in, I'm talking practically in my own life, and even reading through Paul, my mind goes to the chicken and the egg. What comes first? Okay, because we've all met those people who, when you give them the gospel and you love them and you share with the work of Christ, they go, yeah, that's fine. And once I clean up my act, then I'll stump in. And you go, no. You just jump in, and that's part of the process.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think it's also the same for me as a Christian, especially when it comes to self-control. What is the act? Is me putting off the old thing and taking on the new thing? Is that part of it, or do I have to wait for it to happen?
Well, this is the interesting thing, is that when we speak of self-control, that's where it has to happen on the other side of us yielding control, in a sense, to God. I don't really like the phrase. I'm not a big fan of the phrase God being in control, actually, because God puts us in charge. I mean, God empowers us, so He doesn't take. Actually, God empowers us to exercise self-control. He empowers us to exercise authority.
That's a great way to put it.
God is sovereign, but in a sense, He's put us in control. So it's not wrong to say that God is in control. I mean, that's fine. But I think what we mean by that is God is sovereign. He is Lord, but He empowers us actually to exercise authority and self-control. So actually, in order to exercise self-control, we need to surrender ourselves over to God. And so this is where the stepping into the new thing, and by that I mean being filled with the Spirit, accepting what Jesus has done for us. And the new life is on the other side of that.
Yes.
It's not because a lot of people think, I've got to sort my life out and then I'll be accepted by God. Yeah. No, actually, receive God's acceptance through Jesus Christ. Yes. And that's the starting point. That's the beginning, not the destination.
Yes. People
confuse the destination with the beginning. And they think, in order to begin, I've got to get my life together. But that's actually... you actually begin with acceptance.
Yeah. And the Christian life, for those of us who've walked in it for a little while, is nothing else but getting your life sorted as you go.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what I mean?
That's the process. But it has to happen, so we're not doing that in order to be accepted. We're doing that because we have been accepted.
Okay.
And that's the difference. The illustration I use is imagine a going kind of fairy tale sort of story kind of situation. Prince rebels against the king, is thrown in prison. He's in the prison for decades, and one day he gets amnesty. The king forgives him, and he gets reinstated to his princely position. But he's got the manners of the prison. He's been in prison for so long. He's got he smells like the prison. He's been let out of prison, set free, reinstated. That's us, really. I mean, we have been reinstated. So what happens then is that he needs to learn how to begin to live like a prince again. Yeah. But he's not going to do that if he hasn't actually already been. He's not going to do that in the prison.
No.
That's the point. He's going to do that because he's been given that position. So it's because we have been given this new position in Christ that becomes the motivation for us to begin to learn to live in that status, to live up to what we are.
I know we're slightly drifting.
We're drifting.
We're drifting a little bit, but Matt, you are touching on something that I've really been meditating. This has been my Easter meditation because we're recording this just on the tail end of our Easter celebration for 2019, and I spoke to a young pastor who through the history of the Passover meal and then the history of what Christ has done on the cross, his main point in when we were having a conversation about it was this absolute utter joy of this. Again, it was because of the Jewishness of the whole history, and he brought out the points in the Passover meal that are the same as the Jewish marriage act and covenant and everything like that. The point being, part of what Christ was doing on the cross, we see clearly through the New Testament, is God purchasing a bride for his son.
Yeah.
And this is, in that old-fashioned way of saying, not purchasing as in, here's some money, but through the sacrifice of his son, this is the way that I'm bringing this bride to son. And we see that in the prophecies. And I was loving this conversation. And then he finished it off with, and God will never unequally yoke anybody to his son. Yeah. He'll only get the very best daughter. So, my life is full of praise because I am the very best for his son. And it was this, I find that very hard. To think of myself as the very best for his son. I find it very hard to sit in that joy. I understand that God has purchased me. I understand that, what God has done. But, and I bring it all back to this self-discipline because I then get on myself and think that I have to do something to make things right, to warrant it. I need to, flesh it out.
Yeah. Well, it's, and this is where this point about the starting, people confusing the starting point with the destination, because the starting point is that we have been made right, we've been clothed, we have been accepted, and it's actually on the other side of that any change is going to take place. Growth can only happen in an environment of grace, and grace is undeserved favour. So I think back to the point about self-control, because we'll veer off to a rabbit hole, a rabbit hole here. The amazing thing about yielding ourselves to God, it seems like we're giving up authority. What we're giving up is autonomy, that is the right to rule our lives, absolutely. But what we get back is actually a greater measure of authority than we had before, when we were seeing ourselves as the gods of our own lives. So we give our lives over to God, and he accepts us, and we are made right and clean, and we are presented pure as a pure bride in that imagery. And it's like we're being clothed in something, but the reality underneath that is that we're still a mess. But we do have, and we're given a new heart. We're given this. There is this empowerment, spirit empowerment that has been deposited in our hearts that enables us then to exercise self-control. But it doesn't happen automatically, and this is the point. It actually, it's not just about. We should not think of self-control or discipline, self-discipline. I'm preferring to use that because it's not just. Well, you could use either term. My point is, it's not just the negative. It's not just about, I don't do this and I stop doing these things. You can't stop doing something negative unless you do something positive. Yes. So you've got to step from the bad thing into the good thing. And so a lot of people tend to focus on trying to overcome the bad stuff. Well, what good stuff are you stepping? Like, what's the good thing that you're stepping into? So instead of doing this, actually focus on not just not doing something, but focus on doing something positive that's actually going to empower you to overcome the bad stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I think we can get so caught up in trying to stop doing things. Like, people feel very shamed about this and about that, and they focus so much on the sin that actually the answer for that is just to really step onto the pathway that God has opened up for you. You don't have to make yourself right before you do. It's actually step onto that pathway, walk with God, and focus on the positives of what we have, and that is actually what empowers us to overcome the bad stuff.
Yeah.
I hope that's clear, but it is a very important. It's an important point with discipline, because spiritual disciplines are about doing those positive things.
Yeah.
It's about reading scripture, and it's about spending time in prayer. Now, the irony is that people say, "Oh, I can't really. I feel so ashamed, though."
Yes.
Because I want to overcome this, and then I'll feel like I can go to God in prayer. Well, unless you go to God, unless you spend time with God, unless you empower yourself through these positive spiritual disciplines, you're not going to have the strength to overcome those bad things.
Yeah, I hear your point, and I think that's such a great one, that once we meditate and accept and truly believe in our hearts of what God has, called us to be and has given us and everything through Christ, then we can start putting the positives in as we continue.
Yeah. Let me use it. I'll use a personal example, because I think this is actually bridges to a specific form of a specific spiritual discipline that I'd like to throw out there. Actually, what I find that unless God is at the top of the triangle of my desires. I want you to imagine desires like a hierarchy, a triangle, okay?
Like a pyramid.
Yeah, like a pyramid, you know what I mean? And desires kind of, they're all of this sort of pyramid of desires, Now, if God isn't at the top of the pyramid, so the chief thing that really the fulfillment of my desire, then everything below goes haywire. It's just chaos. This is this idea, we've talked about discipline in the last episode, as bringing order to the chaos. Now, when God is God in my life, it has the effect of bringing order to the chaos. Now, someone might say, but God is your God. Yes, I know. But I have to actually constantly step into that and accept that and live in that and entrust myself. I have to exercise that faith. And one of the most important spiritual disciplines for me, and this was the case on the weekend, because what I find is that when I feel like my desires are going haywire and like I'm falling back into just being in a really self-entitled, arrogant, whatever, like all of those bad attitudes start swirling around in my heart. Like I know that it puts my life into a spin, It's like my desires gone rogue, and your whole life is in a spin. One of the most important spiritual disciplines for me is actually spending time sitting still before God and focusing on nothing else than my desire for God to be God of my life again, because I know the answer for and it's like it is the discipline of disciplining my thoughts and my mind, taking every thought captive to Jesus Christ. It is about sitting still before God, waiting on God, and just seeking God. I mean, there's a idea for just seeking God, which to me looks like just being still and waiting on God and allowing my desire for God to burn. And I know what a lot of people experience if they try to do that is their thoughts are wandering. I've got this, I've got to achieve that, I've got to do that. When that happens in my mind, what I do is that I grab hold of those thoughts and I think, well, what's the point of that anyway if I don't have God? What's the point of that? What's the point of this issue? It's like, my biggest problem at any given point is the extent to which I'm in conflict with God. That's my biggest problem. So it's like it's a process of mental discipline where I rein in all my thoughts down to this one desire. Psalm 27, one thing I ask, this is what I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and seek him in his temple. It's that moment, it's the one thing. And that, for me, that has been one of the most important, I would say, the most important spiritual discipline the most life-changing spiritual discipline, because it brings a discipline to my mind. It reigns in my thoughts, and it actually it's more than just a mental thing. It's actually focuses my desires, and it stops the merry-go-round of the desires from spinning.
That's awesome, Matt. Let's take a break. Let's have a little quick break, and let's transition into talking about these spiritual disciplines, disciplines that we could be having in our life that are part of this overall, fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah.
So let's take a break and get back into it on Thrive Deeper. Matthew Jacoby and DJ Payne here for Thrive Deeper. We're on episode 47, and we're talking about self-discipline. We've gone and had a look at, what the thought of self-control is when it comes to the fruit of the Spirit, and we're talking very practically, very matter-of-factly about spiritual disciplines in our own lives, and what they are and what they look like. Now, Matt, you're talking about. You've just spent some time. Can I say the spiritual discipline of meditation?
Yeah,
I know that's a scary word for some people.
Yeah, it is. It's a scary word. But I mean, here is one of the issues that I have with that. Is its association with. It's not. It's associated with Eastern religious practices. It's not really meditation because, first of all. Meditation, like mindfulness or meditation, is a response to a problem, to the problem of our thoughts going rogue. It's a tool for disciplining the mind, really. And actually, I would say that is one of the biggest problems that we have in our culture today is that our minds are hyperactive. We live with these hyperactive minds, overstimulated minds, and the prevalence in the practice of mindfulness, which is even taught in schools these days to kids whose minds are hyperactive, overstimulated minds, like exposure to mass media, constant exposure to media from entertainment media to emails to Instagram and everything put together means we're bombarding our minds with powerful forms of stimulation that are causing our minds to become undisciplined. So one of the biggest issues today is mental discipline. And it's interesting because we in our culture, everyone's into health and exercise, health and fitness, right? So often, a lot of people are very can be really good with health and fitness. And yet when it comes to mental discipline, this is a big issue because, if we're binging on Netflix or if whatever we're doing, we're overstimulating our minds. And
but in the flip side of that, overstimulating our minds, but not activating our minds. We're being very submissive mentally.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Letting it all be impressed.
Yeah. It's passive, really.
Yes. And so I guess again, I just want to be clear here, and again, I play this card all the time. Growing up in a very conservative church, if I met anybody, and the first time I was in a work situation where we had a expert and they said, we're going to do some mindfulness and meditation. I freaked out. I was like, they might as well have said, we're going to have a seance. And I was like, I'm out of here.
Okay, so this is why I want to say something about that. Yeah. Because I suppose what I want to first say is that there's a valid issue that's trying to solve.
Yes.
Now, my point is that I don't think that solves that issue.
That type of practice.
Well, I don't think it's bad.
Yes.
Now, some people say, because it's associated with,
yes.
Just focusing on your breathing and whatever. I mean, that's fine, but I do think it's I think it's a Band-Aid issue, because actually I don't think the problem, I mean, at a surface level, yes, we're overstimulated and we need to, so there are practical things that we can do to overcome that hyperactivity in the mind.
Yes.
And being disciplined in the way that we use media is one way. I think one of the most important forms of fasting, if we want to talk spiritual disciplines, fasting has always, Old and New Testament, been an important spiritual discipline.
Amen.
I think the most important form of fasting would be media fasting.
For people living
For Christians
in the Western world,
today,
yes.
for Christians today, 100% media fasting. One of the most important times of spiritual transformation for me was preceded by the realization that my mind was absolutely hyperactive, and that there was no space for God. I could not still my thoughts and actually I went through a period where I said, okay, what I said to myself is that I'm not going to watch TV,
Yes.
or any form of entertainment media, during the week, just the weekends. Okay. That was a way of, and so we're talking about discipline. Well, that's what I did. And that actually, that created a natural limit on that, because I recognize what all of this entertainment media overload was doing to my brain. So there's cutting down on that. And then the other thing that people do is that they take time to meditate and to focus on their breathing and, still their minds. And now I don't think that's going to work very well if you don't cut down on the things that are actually overstimulating your mind. However, so those things can be good. That's all fine. I think, but one of the things that mindfulness or meditation actually doesn't really deal with is the fact that the key problem actually isn't a problem with our thoughts as such. It is a spiritual problem with our will. The problem lies in our desires. What puts our like distractions, like we would say, our minds get so distracted and hyperactive. Well, they're distracted and hyperactive because we are there's a deliberateness to that. Actually the problem is at a deeper level, and it's to do with our desires, and it's to do with the disorientation of our desires. Like our desires are latching onto this and that and that and this and this and this, and actually the media feeds that as well. I mean, media has a way of feeding our desires, throwing all of these lifestyle options, and we envy that person. We want to be like that hero, and we want to it's like we want to be beautiful like that. And so it's not just a mental problem that the media feeds, but it's actually a deeper sort of spiritual thing, which is another good reason to be discerning about what, and particularly in terms of not only quality but quantity. But the deeper problem with the desires really can only be overcome by us disciplining our desires to seek what our desires were actually made for. Our ultimately desire was made for relationships, not for objects and objectives, because desire is of such a quality, of such a nature, that it is actually never satisfied. Because desire was made for relationships. I love my children and I desire their affection and company, and actually, it's right that should never ever be satisfied in a relationship.
Yeah.
Like I will never say about my kids, I've had enough hugs now, that'll do. No, I have an insatiable desire to connect with my kids, and that's, desire is made for relationships and ultimately for our relationship with God. Now, the problem is when desires fix on objectives or objects. So objectives like I've got to be this beautiful, I've got to be successful, or objects, I've got to get this car or this house or this pay packet.
It's like money,
because desire is of such a nature that it's designed actually not to be ever satisfied. By the time you get what you want, your desire is already outgrown. You know what I mean? Your desire's already outgrown that goal. We need to actually discipline our desires to focus on what actually is truly the thing that satisfies our deepest core desires. And that is, first of all, it's relationships and ultimately our relationship with God. So for me,
It feels to me like you're talking about the over, like a very meta thought about self-discipline.
Yeah.
Like the reasons why,
that's
the
right.
reasons behind self-discipline.
and I guess I'm addressing like
The
what
overall,
meditation and
yes.
mindfulness
and all,
actually
and
don't.
all, and all the spiritual disciplines.
I mean, that's right. Because I think we need to function within our worldview, within our Christian worldview, which says that actually the core problem is a spiritual problem that we have, and that causes every other problem.
And over the years, all the theologians and philosophers and those spiritual types of people, when they talk about spiritual disciplines and outlining different types of schools of discipline, all of that comes down to what you're talking about. All of those are tools or handles on the wall to climbing that type of thing.
And this, it's not just theoretical. I mean, for me, this is I have learned that actually really seeking God and sitting still before God, and we used to talk about tarrying. There's an old word about tarrying, which is just seeking God. I mean, as simple as that sounds, it's training our desires to realize that, because the more you seek, desire is like a muscle. The more you seek something, more you exercise the desire for that thing. So the more I seek God, the greater my desire for God becomes. So when I spend time focusing on my desire for God and allowing my mind to see that actually God is all I need and want. And so when those other thoughts come into my mind, I'm thinking, what's the point of that if I don't have God? It's so, and I have come to like again and again and again, when I do this, the tranquility and peace it brings into my life, I cannot overstate.
Yeah,
it completely It's like when God becomes it's like when my desire latches onto God as their ultimate goal, everything else
falls into place.
Into place. Yeah. And life becomes so beautifully simple. It's like I could care less about anything else. It's like everything else is relative to that. And actually it allows me to engage in everything else in a way that is more present. I'm more present to my family. I actually enjoy everything else more.
Yes.
Because I then can, when I enjoy, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And so when my chief enjoyment is in God, I can then actually enjoy everything else for what they are and not as anesthetics to, cater for the absence of God. Because if God is absent, then everything else we're really using to try to fill that absence. So I guess the tranquility and the peace and the joy that brings to my life means that I go with that joy to every activity. It's like I take that. I can take joy into situations rather than going into situations in a state of neediness, trying to get joy out of those situations. Listen, you're not going to find joy in your work or in your relationships unless you take joy there. For me, this has been absolutely an absolutely transforming aspect of my life.
And you're talking about the spiritual discipline of
waiting on and seeking God,
which is, I think, is a longer way to say meditation. But I know what you're kicking up against.
Well, you keep throwing that word at me, but I mean, I'm okay with that as long as it's understood in terms of a biblical discipline. Yes. I mean, you talk about blessed is the Psalm 1 who meditates on the word day, and I mean meditation is not. I guess let's take it back. Let's take it back.
Well, I guess I'm using it wrong compared to how you've defined it, because there's two principal ways that we define meditation today. The first form is this thinking about thinking, like the thought, emptying your mind, focusing your breathing, that relaxation, everything. We're not talking about.
I know, but in popular usage, that's what people think of when they think of meditation. I'd love to take the word back.
But the second type of word of meditation, like we're talking about in Psalms, is the pondering and the thinking on one thought of spending a long time. I know there's a word picture there, in the Bible of a cow chewing over its food, swallowing it, regurgitating it back, thinking about it again, and that's an idea of meditation. But you're even talking about something different to that. You're talking about a stillness and a waiting and a patience on God.
Yeah. So it's not meditation in the sense that I empty my thoughts. No, I fill my thoughts with God. It's like I allow that desire for God to dominate my thoughts. And when other thoughts come in, I subdue them. Good old subdue the earth, and let's the subduing mandate start in our own hearts and minds.
Yeah. Or taking every thought into captivity.
It's like taking every thought into captivity. It's because if there are things that come into my mind and take my mind away from my desire for God in that moment, then I'm believing a lie. I'm believing that somehow that thing is a more urgent issue than me finding God in that moment. And so when my heart and mind knows that God is, like, the stillness that brings, like I've been in moments where I've sat and waited on God, and it's like the fire of my desire for God is burning. It is actually difficult for me to, it's not like, it actually is such a beautiful place of peace. I often don't want it to end. It's, and what it actually, the focus that it brings and the understanding that it brings to everything else. Like, I feel like I see everything clearly when my spirit isn't muddied by the churning of desires going round and round and round. When the merry-go-round stops, and my desires know that God is the true object of my desire. Everything else, it brings, it's like the mud. And I see everything more clearly. So it's as I said, it's not meditate. Look, I guess I'm happy to call it meditation as long as it's not empty your mind and focus on your breathing, which, actually I don't even think necessarily that's a bad thing, just focusing on I think that can be fine.
And we both know people.
But I just don't think it's going to solve our biggest problems.
Yes. But having said that, let's just put a little asterisk. We both know people who suffer from different types of mental anxiety or, different forms of, ADHD or post-traumatic stress. And I know firsthand, I've seen them go, hang on, I've just got to practice what I've been taught, breathing, stillness, mindfulness, and it helps them.
Brilliant. Yeah,
helps them
it's brilliant for that.
In that physical sense of the mind and the
which
body.
Which is why I'm underlining the fact that that's not a bad thing. I'm just saying it's not the ultimate. It's not the thing.
You're talking about something differently.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just going to a deeper level and talking about discipline. I mean, we are so impatient and we get agitated very quickly, and we want things so quickly. The idea of sitting, as it says in, where is it, in Lamentations chapter 2 or 3, where it says, talks about sitting in silence. It is good for a young man to sit in silence because the Lord has laid it on him. Let him sit. I mean, that idea of just sitting and waiting on God. Psalm 27, wait for the Lord. Take heart, be strong, and wait for the Lord. And I think that discipline of being still and waiting and just desiring and seeking God, not anything from God, but God himself. Because whatever your circumstance is, what you need most is not a change in your circumstance. You need to find God in your circumstance. That is the way forwards. That is the transforming element again and again and again for me. Again and again and again, I come back to this point where I focus on God. I discipline my heart to seek God, and everything else comes into alignment when my heart and my mind know that God is really all I need.
Self-discipline, self self-control. Are you feeling as convicted as I am right about now? I've got a lot to go as far as the journey of this fruit of the Holy Spirit in my life of self-control, self-discipline, and what it means in relating and having Christ in my life. It's a big issue, and hopefully that conversation with Matthew really pondering there about the places where God has met him in when it comes to self-discipline. Hopefully that's been helpful in your walk today. Well, as per usual, like I say every week, get a hold of us. Make sure you get out there and drop us a line. You can do it at our Facebook page, our Facebook group, or you can do it through our website, thrivetoday.net.au. There's a place there you can send us an email, and we would love your questions on the book of Proverbs. We've only got another episode left to go before we transition away, so get those questions in today. If there's anything about the book of Proverbs you've been wondering about, scratching your head about, a verse in particular that's got you really wondering, we would love to hear from you. Until next week, for DJ, Matt, Stuart and the crew, we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to Thrive Deeper. We value all our listening community. If you are on Facebook, search and like Thrive Today page to get all of our latest updates. Our home on the internet is at thrivetoday.net.au. There you can subscribe to the Thrive Daily Reading Guide and contact us directly. That's at thrivetoday.net.au. Until next time, thrive.